friends, welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Stacy and I am the Chapter Conundrum. And in today's video, we're doing part 2 of my recent reads wrap up. And this is going to entail all the books I read in the month of October, which is a lot because of the Long Walk Readathon and the Keymark Discord Monster Hunter Reading Challenge. That's always a mouthful. But I had a really good time doing both of those, and my reading is definitely reflected in that. So I managed to smash out 19 books. I started a 20th that I didn't finish, and I also had a DNF. So in total, I managed to read 7,552 pages, which is not my best reading month ever, but it is pretty decent, and it's definitely my highest reading month this year so far in 2025. So definitely happy with that. In the pile here, I have one book that was a reread, but the others were all new to me. And I did not find any new 5 stars. However, the book I have started that I'm carrying into November could very well shape up to be a 5-star based on how it's going so far. So that is promising. But over half of the books we have to talk about today were a 4-star or higher. So I don't think I did too badly ratings wise, even though I didn't find any new favorites. And I've decided today, instead of talking about these in the order I read them in, we're going to put them in a ranking and start with my lowest rated to my highest rated. And obviously we have a lot of books to get through today, so I'm going to try my best and be fairly brief on all of these. But no promises. We all know I can get chatty and rambly sometimes, so we'll see how this goes. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the book I DNF'd, and that was, sadly, The Boatmore Butcher by Elle Stevenson. So this used to be set up as a trilogy of novellas, and the first one was published and called The Goners, and I read and enjoyed The Goners. I gave it 4 stars, which is why when it was reworked and put into the novel with the rest of the material, we decided to put it on our Thrill, Chill, or Kill picks because Jake also enjoyed The Goners and we were both really looking forward to this one. But sadly, this one really kind of let me down. If you don't know, this follows a group of characters on an island where there is a serial killer running amok and doing crazy things to his victims. So you get several perspectives in here of people who live and work on the island. And that's basically the gist of what this is about and what's going on. So I was very in my head about comparing this to The Goners when I was reading it. And I definitely am sad to say that I enjoyed The Goners a lot more before it was reworked into this. I felt like a lot of the character emotion and reaction to what was happening, and even just like the full scope of like what was happening, was just missing out of here. There were kind of some snippets in here that were familiar in part 1, and those were kind of like my favorite moments in The Goners as well, other than the quintessential scene with the coroner that's just kind of like missing in here. But yeah, sadly, I didn't really enjoy the rework. I was not getting invested with the way that the writing was changed, and I decided to put this down at page 198 out of, I think, 370. So yeah. I did not, thankfully, have any other DNFs or 1 stars after that, but I do have one 2-star book to talk about, and that is Hang the Moon by Jeanette Walls. So this is my now 4th book by this author, and I've had kind of mixed experiences with her before. So I really liked Glass Castle, and I liked Half Broke Horses, and didn't really like Silver Star, and didn't really like this one either. So this is a historical fiction set in Prohibition era Virginia, and it's basically the story of a young woman. It's her coming of age story, and she's kind of the daughter of a very, she's not kind of the daughter, she is the daughter of a very prominent guy in town. He's like the big fish in the small pond kind of setup. And she doesn't really fit into societal norms very well. She's more like rambunctious and rowdy, and she wants to take on kind of like more masculine hobbies and roles. And obviously with the time period this is set in, it's kind of frowned upon, but it's her like pushing back against those things. And it's a lot about her exploring kind of her sense of morality in the situations that she is faced with. So I definitely found some moments in here to like and enjoy, but for the most part, this didn't really work that well for me. And I think it was just because it felt very surface level. I felt like everything kind of needed a little bit more like nuance, depth, exploration. We needed like more tension, more character growth, like more emotion, just like a lot more than what we got. It just kind of at some points felt like we were getting like a quick spark notes of like the events that happened in this woman's life. And we got a little bit of inner monologue on some of her thought processes and like some of how other people reacted to her. But yeah, this just left me wanting more for sure. And now that I've read 4 books by her and I have seen kind of my ratings, I know it's a trend that I don't enjoy her fiction. I enjoy her nonfiction, or like her fiction that is very true to nonfiction events. So that's good for me to know in the future. But this was on my self-destruct for 2025. So I'm glad that I at least have gotten this read and don't have to wonder if I'm missing out on anything. So getting into my 3-star reads now, the first one we have to talk about is Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. And this was definitely outside of my comfort zone, being that it kind of skews more literary, but I am always game for a dystopian. And I got this in a blind date with a book box, so I was happy to give it a go. And in here you have some prisoners in the American prison system, but it's a little twisted because they are in this special program. It's called CAPE, and it stands for the Criminal Action Penal Entertainment. And it's basically like the return of the gladiators. So these characters are basically put into deathmatch situations, and they are fighting for their freedom. I think once you get to like a certain rank, you end up gaining your freedom. But a lot of the story is them trying to preserve their humanity in all of this. And it's also a good social commentary on the prison system. I definitely thought that this touched on some interesting subject matter and is an important book in a lot of ways. But the writing style in here is really the reason that this didn't work for me. So the way that this is told just felt very impersonal. And I think that, coupled with that it focused more on like telling you what was happening instead of like exploring through the characters what was happening, it just didn't really pull me in as much as I wanted to, especially because it's the type of story where it's formatted like it could pull me in if it was written differently. So a lot of this kind of had a little bit of vibes from like Orange is the New Black, where you're exploring snippets of different inmates' backstories. And that's a show that definitely fascinated me, that I enjoyed. So while I was curious at their backstories for sure, just the way that this was written didn't really grab me at all. I think part of my problem is also that we just didn't really spend a significant amount of time with like specific characters. It felt like we were kind of hopping around a lot too. All in all, I just wanted a lot more emotion and feeling in the writing of this one, and also for it to just really take its time and dig into the better aspects of it more. It was interesting. I'm glad I read it. I would recommend it to people who are interested in more like literary skewing books that want more of a commentary, and a book that really touches on some of the injustices. But overall, it didn't work the best for me. So 3 stars. Next up, we gotta talk about With a Vengeance by Riley Sager. And this one makes me sad because if you know me, you know that he's one of my favorite thriller authors typically. So his new release getting a 3-star rating for me is definitely disappointing. And I think it's extra disappointing for me personally because the last like 3 books he's published in a row now have been like my least favorites of all of his books. So it's like, it doesn't really bode well for me in terms of like what he keeps coming out with or what he could potentially come out with next. But I'm definitely going to still continue to pick him up and give them a try. This one had some very specific reasons it didn't work for me, and we'll get into that in a minute. But before that, I should tell you what it's about. So essentially, we follow a young woman in here named Anna, and she's the daughter of a man who was framed for a very tragic event. But it's been a few years and she is out for revenge at this point. So she has invited the perpetrators on a train journey, and she has orchestrated that the perpetrators are going to be arrested at their destination. So she wants everything to go like according to schedule so that this all works out. But her plan is quickly derailed when some of the passengers turn up dead, and it appears that somebody is framing her for these murders. So I definitely thought that this had an interesting premise, and I was curious about how Riley Sager would handle this one. But sadly, it really was like a true homage to Agatha Christie. And what I mean by that is that you spend a ton of time once like the first murder has taken place with the characters postulating on who could have done it. And those kinds of things in mystery thrillers never ever work that well for me. And I think it's twofold. The first is that I don't always love the logic of their theories. I usually have some reason to poke holes in it. And on top of that, I just much prefer being able to come up with my own theories given their own information. I don't want to have it spoon-fed to me. And also, I don't want to have to kind of try and follow all of the details of their logic necessarily all the time. I would so much rather just be like given little reveals and try and formulate my own theories. But further to that, this doesn't work for me because I want the characters' reactions emotionally to what's going on. I want to know, are they devastated about this? Are they happy about this? Are they freaked out? Are they scared? Those are the kinds of elements to the characters that are going to draw me into the book more and feel like it's more of an experience. So because of that, classic mysteries typically do not work well for me. And I'm definitely finding that that's holding true with modern books with that type of formatting or writing as well. And then on top of that, being not my favorite, some of the reveals in here were just like, really? Like, come on. Like, he used the same reveal more than once. And at that point, it just felt like it was a cheap trick. And it was just like, ugh. And then some of the other reveals, I was like, is this even a reveal? Like, I saw this coming 10 miles away. So anyway, this was a big disappointment for me, but there were still elements of it that I did enjoy. Like, I definitely still enjoy Riley Sager's writing for the most part. He's definitely good at setting a scene and introducing things in a way that gets me interested. I do also like some of his character work. It's just my favorite elements of it were missing in this one because of what he chose to do with it. So yeah, sadly, disappointed. Now we're moving on up to 3.5-star books, so definitely better. We've got to talk about Burn the Negative by Josh Winning. And this one also has an interesting premise. So this one follows a reporter who is sent to write an article on the set of a rebooted like movie or TV. I can't remember if they're rebooting it as a TV show or a movie, but anyhow, she's being sent to the set of a reboot. But the clincher is that the original movie was a cursed movie. And further to that, she is like now older and like has changed her identity, but she was a child star in this movie and most of the cast of the movie had died. So she's obviously got some strong feelings about this situation. So on that basis, I thought the first half of this was really strong. I definitely really enjoyed kind of exploring like what had happened and getting this main character's reactions to everything currently happening in the present timeline. But where this kind of fell apart for me a little bit was the second half. This kind of ended up turning into a lot of action sequences that were harder for me to follow. I didn't really like the way that the action was written in here. And also because it focused more on action, we got less of kind of like the character emotion that I was enjoying in the first half. And I also just didn't really love the direction that the ending of this one or like the resolution of this one took. I wanted something different than that for sure, but definitely a very strong first half of this, and I was really enjoying it until things kind of shifted. My next 3.5-star read on the ranking here is The Long Walk by Stephen King. So this was really fun for me to pick up after having designed The Long Walk Readathon because I hadn't seen the movie or read the book at the point where we designed the readathon. So it was kind of fun to see like some of the same types of situations that the characters face in here that we had like in the readathon come up. But anyway, public service announcement, the introduction of this completely spoils the end of The Running Man. So if you have not yet read The Running Man and you would like to, I would recommend skipping the introduction. But aside from all of that, I did get to watch the movie once the readathon was announced. And so I was excited to kind of delve more into the characters in here, and also was hoping for some more like world building and kind of like reasons as to why the walk was set up the way it was. But I kind of was disappointed in that regard. So I did get more character emotion, but it was a lot of like inner monologue that was sexual in nature, and I was just like, it felt randomly placed. It didn't feel necessarily warranted at times. So it was more annoying than enjoyable for me in those regards. And I definitely was disappointed in terms of like getting any more answers as to like the world building or the setup of the society, because there's really not that much stuff in here. I also thought it was kind of random that the audiobook for this did not include any of the chapter headings. So that's something to be aware of if you want to listen to this. But otherwise, Kirby Hayborn narrates this, and he does a really good job with the audio. I I also thought that this book kind of threw you into the deep end with like no setup and no context. And in a lot of ways, I was glad I had watched the movie prior to picking this up, because I definitely enjoyed the beginning and the opening sections to this more, having had the context from the movie because of that, and just because of the type of reader I am. My favorite moments in here were definitely the ones where we got to read about different characters' backstories and kind of explore like what made them join the walk, or why they were there, or like what their past entailed. Those were definitely the highlights for me. And I also think that thinking about this in more terms of like a commentary on military conscription makes a lot more sense, and it makes this even more chilling. So I can appreciate it for some of the commentary that it has that's like very subtle in those areas and in that regard. And I think my last kind of thought was, just know if you do decide you want to read this, just be aware that this is definitely a product of its time. It came out in the 70s, and attitudes towards people and things were definitely different. So there were definitely lines and moments in this book that had me cringing because of like it being a product of its time, essentially. My next and final 3.5-star read for the month was The Gate of the Feral Gods, which is the 4th Dungeon Crawler Carl book by Matt Dinniman. And I think this is the lowest rating I've given a DCC book so far. And this also seems to be a theme this month, but where the heck did the reactiveness of the characters go for this installment? Like, my favorite elements of the series were Carl and Donut's reactions to everything, and then in this book it just felt like super diminished. In earlier installments of the series, we really get a better look into their headspace on like what they're planning as to like what they're encountering in the dungeon, and that was an element I really enjoyed. So to kind of like have them feel more established and just kind of like just go into action sequences without us being able to, as the reader, go through like the inner monologue of what's their plan, how are they going to tackle this, what's their reactions to how it's going, is it going according to plan. Like, those are some of the elements that I really enjoyed in the earlier books, and that just was like felt like a big piece missing here. Another one of my favorite elements of the series is hearing about what upgrades they've gotten, or like what new spells they've learned, and kind of like making theories about how those things could come into play in like future encounters. And that's definitely not a focus in this installment either. It feels like a lot of those elements were glossed over. So I've done a lot of complaining about this book so far, but I did still really enjoy it, I promise. I do still really enjoy the Dungeon Crawler Carl books, and obviously Princess Donut is the best. But I think like it's hard not to be a little bit disappointed, because some of my favorite aspects to the earlier books were like diminished or kind of like missing in some regards here. So I think like that's how I'm justifying my rating to you guys. But really, like, it is a really fun experience of a series, and I definitely enjoy following Carl and Donut's adventures through the dungeon. I like in this installment that the characters were kind of like encountering new situations that kind of put them outside their comfort zone, or that they reacted strongly to at times. So those elements were definitely really interesting as well. And yeah, had a good time with this one, but also simultaneously was disappointed in this one because it didn't live up to the earlier books in the series for me. The epilogue of this, though, has a pretty exciting thing that has me really looking forward to book 5. So I'm definitely curious to keep going, and I'm motivated to keep going with the series. On to some 3.75-star reads. So not quite 4 stars, but higher than 3.5. The first one we're going to talk about is The Family Experiment by John Mars. And this is the 5th book in the One universe. This definitely has some spoilers for the Passengers and the One, and also the Marriage Act. So be aware of that if you have any desire to read this one. But essentially in this one, we have like a near future sci-fi dystopian situation where conception is a widespread struggle. And so this company has developed a way to basically, like, through virtual reality and like haptic suits, raise virtual children that feels like it's a realistic situation. And to introduce this to the world, they decide to showcase it in a reality TV show featuring several couples having the experience of raising some virtual kids. So I was intrigued by this premise for sure. I mean, I wanted to know more about what these AI virtual kids were like, what the experience of the reality show was going to be like. And usually with reality shows, you know, these characters are going to be thrown some loops and stuff. So I was curious to see like how this would all go. And also with John Mars, he is very good at kind of like exploring his dystopian setups with lots of different perspectives and kind of showcasing like these are the different types of like personalities that would encounter these different types of things with this scenario, and like this is how it could go. And it's just like an interesting exploration into like this new thing that would be possible in this world. So that definitely held true here. I definitely felt like we got some interesting exploration as to like how this would go for different types of people and like different scenarios that people could encounter in this kind of situation. So all of that was definitely interesting for me, and I definitely enjoyed those elements to the story. I also was satisfied by the ending of this one, and I always like the feeling that I get reading thrillers when like you kind of figure out that like once you get the reveal, oh, there was like some subtle foreshadowing for this kind of laid in. And I had that kind of moment in here, which is definitely enjoyable for me. But I think my main issue why I didn't love this more is that the book just chose to focus on elements of the story that just didn't draw to me as much. I was kind of hoping for more of like the focus on the characters' experience with this reality TV show, and also just like what spanners were going to be thrown in the works for these characters. And I was hoping to kind of get like more on like the actual experience of raising these AI virtual kids. But while those things are there, they're kind of like glossed over or not the most focal point of the book. There really is more of like a different kind of theme that I don't really want to go into because I don't want to give you any idea about like how it ends or like spoil anything for you. But suffice it to say that this has a different focus, a different theme, a different message, and it just wasn't quite what I was hoping for, but I still enjoyed what it gave me, if that makes sense. So the next 3.75 star read I have to talk about is The Game's Gods Play by Abigail Owens. And this is the first entry in a series. I believe book 2 is out, but book 3 is not yet out. And I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be a trilogy. But this was a really easy, entertaining read. And I definitely had a good time with lots of aspects of this one. So basically in here, you're following human tributes competing in trials to see which Greek god assumes power in this world. And our main character is chosen to compete for Hades, who hasn't entered any of the trials in the last, like, I don't know if it was like ever or like in the last however many years. But anyway, there's a lot of suspicion about Hades and what he's up to because he's randomly decided to enter, and a lot of that ends up translating to our main character's experience and how people react to her and treat her in this competition. But the reason that this didn't like really stick with me or like get a higher rating for me is that I felt a lot of elements to it just could have been a lot better developed. There were a lot of moments that I did really enjoy it, but then also like there were a lot of aspects that I'm like, oh, I really like would have liked it if we had a little bit more on this specific thing. So I think like the main draw for me of this was just the trials. Like I like a good competition and trials scenario, and I was really looking forward to seeing like what all did these characters have to do. And some of them were really enjoyable to read about for sure, but then others were like kind of smushed together into like quick things that were a little bit glossed over, or some of them were like fairly simplistic, and I was like, really? Like that's what this god who has been around forever is like coming up with. So in that way, like it was good, it was entertaining, it was an easy read that I liked, but it wasn't really what I was hoping it was going to be either. But I think the thing is, like, the best way to explain is like I wanted more from this because I enjoyed what was already there. Like I felt like this had more promise, or like it had more potential than maybe it delivered. But knowing that it is a series has me intrigued as well, because I'm hoping we get a little bit more into like character backstories and stuff in the sequel, which with the way that this one ended is likely, at least with a certain character. The other like random aside comment I have about this one is that there's some random Canadian rep in here with like one of the contestants chosen for the trials being Canadian. But the author is definitely not Canadian, and as a Canadian reading it, I can tell because like there's things that are like she's using slightly weirdly, if that makes sense. So like she has them saying things like a, but like a isn't just like a chat interjection used the way that is. Like a is used conversationally to invite someone's opinion. So like her not really nailing the usage of a was kind of a little strange. And then also she has the character call someone a hoser, but like that's kind of like a specific subcultural thing. And also the way she used it in that conversation kind of like you could tell she didn't really quite understand like what the meaning of that is to us. So yeah, there was just kind of like some weird aside stuff in the Canadian rep. So I definitely think that could have been better. Maybe she needed like a Canadian to work with her on those moments, or like get someone's opinion, or like beta readers or something. But thankfully it didn't really take away from my enjoyment of this. I definitely was entertained throughout, and I'm definitely going to be picking up the sequel at some point. So now we are almost halfway through, and we are getting into my 4-star reads. And the first one of those, I'm actually going to tell you what it is, but then talk about it later, because it is the 3rd book in the Mindfuck series by St. Abby, and I read the first 3 this month. So I'm going to talk about them all together. But just know that Scarlet Angel, which is book 3, comes in the ranking here. So next up, we get to talk about X's and O's by Amy Lee. And this is a fun contemporary romance that's by a Canadian author. And if you have been following my channel for some time, you know that I typically really enjoy contemporary romance by Canadian authors. So when I found out that she was Canadian, it was exciting for me, and I was definitely looking forward to this. So there were definitely elements to this that I enjoyed. But before we get into that, I should probably tell you what it's about. And essentially the gist of this one is that this woman is kind of looking for a date to a gala event that she has coming up, but she doesn't really have anyone new on the horizon. So she starts kind of like going through her list of exes and revisiting them to see if like they could potentially be a good fit to be a good date for this event. But this is really a romance with her roommate, who is kind of like watching this all unfold, but who she hasn't really considered. I guess they had some misunderstandings, and she has like a different impression of him and his feelings. So yeah, it was a really cute time, but I also wish that like we kept this concept, but we had like less exes to go through and just spent more time like on each of them, because I felt like there wasn't really much that made the exes like distinct or unique or really stand out in my brain. The romance that's brewing is definitely like the forefront of this book. And that said, I definitely enjoyed the main romance here. I mean, this is why it got the rating it did. The characters were really interesting. I liked the dialogue for sure. I liked the slow burn and the slow build. And I liked kind of how they were with each other and their dynamic. Like I could definitely tell that there was a reason that these two gravitated towards each other, and like they should be a couple, you know? Like that's always a good feeling to get when you're reading a romance, because there's nothing worse for me than picking up contemporary romance and thinking like, these two are only together because they don't want to be single or because they're physically attracted to each other. Like I need more of a chemistry between the characters to really get me invested, and this gave it to me. But that said, I didn't love the 3rd act conflict in here. I did like how it was resolved, but it definitely played with like the miscommunication, misunderstanding trope, which is not generally a favorite for a lot of people. And in this instance, it didn't really work that well for me either. So that is why it gets a 4-star rating from me. But overall, would definitely recommend this one, and had a good time with it. It had its strong elements. The next 4-star read I had was Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. And this is an interesting horror book that's set in the 70s. And in here, you have a home for young girls, and essentially like specifically like pregnant, unwed teenage girls. So they're sent by their families often to this home to spend their pregnancy there in order to like hide their pregnancy from their communities. And essentially they're expected to like stay there until they give birth, give their children up for adoption, and then return to their lives without like a big scandal or gossip. And this book definitely centers a couple characters' experiences going into this home and staying there, and kind of like the emotional journey of their situations, which I really appreciated. The first half of this was like phenomenal because of how that element of the story was handled. And then obviously, given the title of this, you know that some of the girls are going to at some point turn to witchcraft to kind of solve some of their problems. So I also liked that element of the story. And then the second half of this really focused more on the action of what was happening and kind of resolving some plot lines, and less so on how the characters were experiencing those things. And so, like, this is a theme I have in so many of the books in this wrap up. Like, I don't know what it was, but where were the reactions for all of the characters for the books I was reading this month? Anyhow, tangent aside, I liked the second half a little bit less because it felt like the way that the second half was written kind of took away from those elements, which were phenomenal in the first half. And I was really loving the book. Like, I thought that this could potentially be a 5-star read for me. I still really liked it. I liked how it ended in some ways. I definitely felt like I got some resolution and had a good time reading it, but it wasn't an all-time new favorite because of how the second half was handled. I definitely do recommend this one, but also check content and trigger warnings if you need to, because there's a lot in there. My last 4-star read was Bride by Ali Hazelwood, and I really enjoy her contemporary romances, so I was curious to dive into Bride and kind of see how she handled more of like the fantasy paranormal romance sphere. And in here you follow Misery, who's the daughter of a powerful vampire, and she's essentially married off to an alpha werewolf for some kind of like alliance situation. But Misery has her own reasons for agreeing to this, and she's definitely there to find some things out. So it's definitely intriguing to kind of follow that storyline and the romance plotline in here. So I definitely had a good time reading this one. I definitely liked the characters in here a lot. I liked the character banter and dialogue in here. I thought the main character was really funny, and there were definitely some humorous moments that I really enjoyed. I do think that the plot of this could have used more development for sure. I wanted more happening. I wanted more like interesting things to wonder about. What we did get was good. I just wanted more to it, basically, because it didn't have like my full investment in the story, because I just needed there to be a little bit more of a story, I think. I did like this enough to have a desire to pick up and read the sequel, Mate, so I have that one on hold from the library, and we'll get to it at some point. But the one other complaint I have in here that kind of like also brought my enjoyment down a bit was that there was some like weird, dubious sexual content in here. So that's also something I encountered with the Love Hypothesis, but this one just felt a little bit more bizarre, I guess. So I didn't love that element to this, but I am curious enough and I like the characters enough to continue. So definitely looking forward to Mate at some point. On to my 4.25-star reads. The first one I'm going to talk about is She Didn't See It Coming by Sherry LaPena. And this was Sherry LaPena's new release of 2025. I think this came out in August or maybe at the end of July. I can't remember. The summer, anyway. And I was excited to finally get to it. So essentially in here you follow the story of a missing woman. And we find out that she's missing because she doesn't turn up to pick her daughter up from daycare after a day where she worked from home. And her husband is called to the daycare to go get their child. And he comes home and she's nowhere to be found. He can't reach her and he gets the police involved. So really this is the investigation of her disappearance. And one of the things that I love about Sherry LaPena, and this definitely held true in this one, is that she is very good at creating a lot of credible red herrings. So she's good at creating a lot of options and possibilities as to who done it. She's good at developing those to where you have multiple theories running, or like you can strengthen theories that you have based on what she's put in there as the story develops. And definitely that held true here. In fact, I think she kind of overdid it in this one, which affected my rating, because she introduced so many things that felt more like a side plot that in the end I ended up wanting more resolution on and more answers to, as to like, well, if that isn't the answer and this thing over here is the answer, well, what's the deal with that kind of thing? So like I had that sort of experience with this one, and I think that's why it wasn't a 5. But I definitely enjoyed this one, had a good time reading it, was interested and invested throughout. I liked that I had theories. I liked that the resolution was one of my theories. But yeah, I think I just wanted a little bit more resolution and wrapping up for me to love this one. So I think What Have You Done and Everyone Here Is Lying and The Couple Next Door are all like superior to this one in my opinion, but this still was a solid reading experience that I enjoyed. My next 4.25-star book was The True Love Experiment by Christina Lauren. So I have read and enjoyed several of their contemporary romances, but I definitely have like a variation in my enjoyment of them. Some of them can be great and some of them can be just good, and some of them are kind of okay. This one I liked. It wasn't a new favorite, but I had a good time with it. And essentially in here, the premise is you have this producer who's, I guess, network isn't getting the best like attention or ratings, and so his boss basically forces him into doing a reality show similar in vein to The Bachelorette, and he ends up kind of wrangling in this famous romance author to be the Bachelorette. And she's really an interesting character for sure. But in this world, you can test DNA to see like the compatibility of people. And so that's kind of like a feature of the show too. And in order for this romance author to agree to do this show, she gives him a list of like character types that she wants to make appearances on the show. And so it's just like, it's a really fun romp of a read. Like it's a good time. It's entertaining. There's some really good commentary on like being a romance reader and how that's kind of like viewed by society negatively, and that there's like more to romance books and they have merit. So there's some really good like lines in here on that. But essentially our main romance ends up being more of a forbidden romance between her and the producer. And so that introduces a lot of tension to the story, but you know that right away. Like there's some kind of like tension brewing before the show even starts, like as he's kind of like getting it set up and recruiting them. So that's not a spoiler. But I kind of wish that this dug more into the TV show storylines and the characters, because I just feel like that just would have been more entertaining. But I did like this one and enjoy it more than The Soulmate Equation, just because I felt like this actually focused on the romance at hand more so than that book did. I felt like that one focused more on like some side stuff and character stuff aside from the romance. This one definitely was more of a return to being focused on the romance. And yeah, had a good time with it for sure. It was definitely entertaining. Enjoyed some of the commentary, but thought it could have been a little bit better as well. And my other 4.25-star reads were books 1 and 2 in the Mindbug series by S.T. Abbey. So The Risk and Sidetrack. So remember earlier I mentioned in the 4-star category that I was going to talk about Scarlet Angel with these. I ended up reading the first 3 books in this series, and they were just really fun, like entertaining, binge-worthy reads. So essentially in here you follow a female serial killer, and she has a romance blossoming with an FBI agent who happens to be investigating the murders she's committing. So right away, like a lot of tension. You know that there's going to be a lot of like close calls, tension-filled moments, near escapes, like all those types of things. And that is something that is present. I will say the covers of this series are misleading, because I thought that this was going to be more of like an erotic romance, and that's like not the focus of this at all. And the other kind of like key aspect to this is that she's not just like a random serial killer. She's out for vengeance on people from her hometown who did something really terrible to her. And a lot of this book, you're kind of like getting little tidbits and pieces as to maybe what happened in the past, and you're trying to figure out the scope of, okay, what happened and why did this affect her the way it did. Like, you know that there's more to it, but you don't really understand like what that is, and you're slowly kind of figuring things out that help piece it together. So that is a really enjoyable experience, and actually probably the highlight of these books for me, because it's like the tension of the romance blossoming coupled with the mystery elements and like the reveals and just having things pieced together. It's really fun. Now that said, like the subject matter is not fun. It's definitely dark. Obviously there's a lot of trauma that happened in this character's backstory. So, you know, just be aware of that. I definitely don't think that these are like the best written. In fact, the writing could probably use some work, but they were just so entertaining that I kind of overlooked that. So yeah, had a great time with all 3 of these. I will say, like, I think I've seen reviews and people say that the character archetypes in here are very reminiscent of the character archetypes on Criminal Minds. So if you're a fan of that, then you may not enjoy this as much, because it may just feel kind of like a rehash, or like she's been like too inspired by. But as somebody who hasn't watched that, obviously it's not a problem for me. So I'm definitely enjoying it and very eager to read books 4 and 5 and finish out the series this month. Now we get into my 4.5-star reads. There are 3 of them to talk about. So my highest rated books of the month. And the first one of those was a reread of Confessions by Kanai Minato. So in here, you're following a school teacher teaching her final lecture. She's decided to retire because there has been a tragic accident where her daughter has passed away at her school. And the storytelling style of this one is unique because you have only a few chapters. I think there's like 6 chapters, and 5 of them are different perspectives, and every perspective has something to contribute to the catalyst for this retirement and like a distinct voice. So it's a very enjoyable read, and definitely the standout element of this are some of the bombshell moments and some of the reveals. Like, this is one that I can remember audibly gasping when I read the first time. And there are definitely some big surprises. I will say the tone of this is dark too, so if you don't really enjoy darker tone books, then this may not be your cup of tea. But this is a really fascinating read for sure. It's well paced. I enjoy the story. I enjoy the ending. But it was fun to revisit this one as well because I had read it, I think, 2019. So it had been 6 years. And one of the prompts for Keymark Monster Hunter was a reread from long ago. So I decided this was what I was in the mood to pick up and revisit. And I'm glad I did. I had a really good time. Obviously gave it 4.5 stars. Definitely would recommend this if it sounds like it's going to be your thing. And a solid thriller. Next up, we got to talk about one that's going to make Jake very happy. Blacktop Wasteland by S.A. Cosby. So I had a good time reading this one this month as well. And this follows, I think, Beauregard is his name. And he is a mechanic who's kind of like gotten out of the life, straightened himself out. But his circumstances are starting to crumble, and he ends up kind of like getting pulled back into some shady stuff in order to make ends meet. And essentially in here, like, this is a jewelry store heist. And this is definitely a really good read. So true to S.A. Cosby's style, the plot thickens considerably as you progress. And he has a really good way of like weaving in subtle social commentary with like the realistic grittiness of his characters and his prose. He's excellent at writing tension, and you definitely empathize with his characters as you're reading. And he also tends to have some interesting action moments and like some very high stakes things. And definitely this held true to all of that. So no surprise, given that I really enjoy some of his other books, that I ended up loving this one as well. And I think the main reason that it doesn't get a 5 for me is just because I compare it to Razorblade Tears, which I loved even more. I think like that one had better character dialogue and kind of like more snarkiness and interesting character moments than this one did. So I still really enjoyed this one. Thought it was very solid. Had a great reading experience with it. It just is not quite as upper tier for me as Razorblade Tears. But yeah, definitely would recommend if you enjoy S.A. Cosby, and 4.5 stars. Then the final book that I finished that I also had a really great time with, and this will make Fina very happy, is Mirror Sight by Kristen Britton, the 5th book in the Green Rider series. So Green Rider as a series follows our main character, Kerrigan, who is expelled from her university. And on her way home, she encounters a Green Rider pierced by 2 black arrows who begs her to take up his mission and deliver his message to the king. She accepts, and she's kind of chased as she's delivering this message, and things expand in scope a whole ton from there. This is a big departure from that initial synopsis of book 1 for sure. A lot has happened. A lot continues to happen. But that's like the gist of how the series starts and what I can tell you without spoiling anything. So basically my feelings on this one. It did take me kind of a bit to get reoriented into the story and in this world. So at the end of book 4, there's like a huge event that happens that changes some things. I'm not going to say more than that. But in book 5 at the start, you're figuring out a lot of like the ramifications of the ending of book 4 and like what has happened, what is happening, what is going on. So it took me a bit to get sucked back into this. for sure. But once I definitely enjoyed myself. I think the main reason that this didn't get a full 5 for me is that in a way this feels like a big tangent or a big aside from like the main plot of the series that we're going after. And also my favorite books in the series are the ones where I get to have a lot of theories and do a lot of theory crafting. This one introduced me to a whole lot more questions. So in some ways, it felt more of like a setup book than a progression book. So I did still enjoy it. I definitely like reading about this world, these characters. I like Kristen Britton's writing and the situations that she puts her characters in. Man, her characters cannot catch a break. And definitely I felt that reading this. Definitely invested in this series, excited to continue. But I wish that we had gotten like more of side character perspectives to kind of like progress more of the main series plot in this one. And I also wish that we had just gotten more answers or like more clues in this one. But yeah, definitely still a fantastic entry in the series. But it kind of falls like towards the middle of my ranking of the books in the series. I think my favorite is still book 2, followed by book 3. And then I think this one. But yeah, super excited to continue with the series, catch up on it this year, and had a great time with this. If you are curious as to the book I mentioned that I started that could shape up to be a 5-star, but that I didn't finish yet, it's Blood Over Brighthaven by Emma Wong. So if you know, one of my favorites is Sword of Kaigen. Absolutely no surprise that she could end up being a favorite for me again. And I'm loving it so far, but I will save my thoughts for that for my November wrap up. So that was it for the books I have to talk about today that I read in the month of October. It was a lot. I think I was more chatty than I intended to be. So hopefully this doesn't end up being like 2 hours long. Let me know down below in the comments what your experiences or thoughts or feedback for any of these books were. Also, let me know if I've convinced you to pick any of these up, if I've convinced you to avoid any of these, and let me know what your favorite books of October were, or anything else you have to add about the readathons for sure, because I always love hearing about people smashing their reading goals and enjoying the readathons that we do. So yeah, any of that stuff, leave in the comments for me. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out if you want to, and have a great day. Bye.